Okay, one person. Utterly pathetic. Okay, so I kind of guessed that might happen. So what we're going to do, I'm going to start the session by asking each of the panelists to give the 1-minute version of their 7-minute presentation, okay? So you will have saved some time and you will get the pocket version of what they said. And you can go back to that and look later if you find what they say interesting, okay? So I'm going to introduce each one as we go along. Lindsey Stroud, 1 minute on what on earth you were saying about stealth prohibition. Go.
I need to borrow your microphone. Yeah. So I kind of talked about the FDA and how unfortunate our pre-market tobacco application process is and how expensive it is and how it really is defining the companies that are going to be able to, you know, produce less harmful products. So Norbert.
Well, I talked about how the German law came to, about vaping tax came to be, and the strange shenanigans that went on, like originally it was a nicotine tax, and in the last 2 days, in a closed chamber session, they completely gutted it and replaced it with volume tax. That's even worse, and rushed it through committee and parliament, and they had no chance to criticize, improve, or even read it before they nodded. And pretty much the same went on with the TPD. A compromise was found in parliament, and later, behind closed doors, it was totally gutted and replaced with something else, and Parliament had no other chance than to nod it off or restart the whole process in the next session.
Agnieszka?
Thank you. So Agnieszka Wyszyńska-Szulc. So I was a bit more generic in my presentation. So I spoke about the general rules that can be applied to tobacco control policy and how the differentiated regulation can actually support the governments in reaching their goal of smoke-free goals. So how this mix could look like in terms of regulatory and fiscal measures. I also mentioned there that actually the tobacco harm reduction can be a complementary pillar to tobacco control policy. It does not need to replace the existing measures, cessation and prevention, which often is actually something that I think the governments are quite concerned about because they think, okay, it's a revolution. It's not. It's just making the use of very pragmatic approach and making the policy more progressive than it is today.
Okay. Federico?
Hello, I'm Federico Fernandez from Somos Innovación in Latin America, and now a little bit in Europe as well. And I spoke very briefly about an index that we're about to publish, hopefully by the end of this month or beginning of July, that measures the public policies and the realities and basically how able you are if you're a citizen of 59 countries. We measure 59 countries, all of the Latin American countries, plus Canada, plus 25 in Europe, plus some in Asia, Oceania, and Africa. How able you are to get basically like the three branches of tobacco harm reduction products, vaping, heated tobacco, and snus and nicotine pouches. And well, some of the things I will be mentioning, just for you to know, the world champion according to our index is not the United Kingdom, it's not England. It happens a little bit like in football, but we'll see.
Okay, you're not going to tell us who the world champion is?
Maybe later.
Okay, maybe we'll put you under some pressure to fess up something interesting. All right, so that's what you missed. It's all accessible from the menu online, and it's good stuff. Now, this panel is actually about stealth prohibition, okay? Now, I think everybody knows what prohibition is. Fair? You just write a law and ban it, and of course it disappears completely. What is stealth prohibition? What do we mean by stealth prohibition? Let's just go along the line and get some of the measures that we think have a, if you like, a partial prohibitionist element to them. What constitutes stealth prohibition, and where are we seeing it? Okay, Lindsey, go.
The PMTA process, pre-market tobacco product application process, for people who are outside of the states, where the idea that you have to go through these crazy regulations in order to bring a product that consumers have been using for at least a decade, and getting, authorization from the FDA in order to legally market it, and then draconian taxation when you start taxing less harmful tobacco products on par with combustible cigarettes. So you're kind of, at least I see it mostly in the States, but you're seeing that a little bit internationally. It negates the idea of harm reduction. Mm-hmm. You should be, here's a combustible cigarette, and you should be actually trying to push consumers towards a less harmful product and using taxation that way by lesser taxes.
All right, one of the interesting things about the US situation is this PMTA process. Now, it's an authorization system. So how does that function just explain why we would consider that to be a stealth prohibition?
The federal government is handling it, and they don't really have the enforcement to go after all the products. But they're picking the winners and losers, quite honestly, without any regard towards the consumers that are using these products to quit smoking. We've seen, I'm with also the American Vapors Manufacturers Association, and we did a lot of these, I call them like little mini PMTAs and stuff with these companies that have been around for like 10 years, and they have all these consumers that have used these products, and that's not good enough for the FDA. You have to have like a crazy trial and everything, kind of similar to a pharma pathway, actually. Mm-hmm.
So essentially the burden of getting over this hurdle, only the largest companies with the most basic products can do it. Everything else will struggle to achieve a PMTA, and that's what gives it a stealth prohibition feel.
Well, she can talk more about how much they spent on their, the IQOS, and the IQOS went to they went through the PMTA process and the MRT, the modified risk tobacco product application, billions of dollars, and they estimate actually over $100,000 for a single PMTA for one flavored e-liquid.
And time that we need to wait.
Yeah.
Time and expertise, capacity.
Oh yeah,
of
the
labs.
time. Yeah, you guys took 4 years or something. It was
Right, Norbert, hand in the mic. Lindsey mentioned taxes are a form of stealth prohibition. How come? Surely everything is taxed.
Yes, the problem is how much is it taxed.
Okay.
And in the case of Germany, the taxes are extremely high, at least in the final stage. Then they will be much more expensive than smoking and even more expensive than NRT products. Funny. And what's worse for consumers is that it's a volume tax that taxes especially heavy the usual behavior of consumers to lower the nicotine concentration when they try to wean themselves off nicotine consumption. Some do, or many do. And the lower the nicotine concentration, effectively the higher the tax. So it drives people to consume higher concentrations to avoid the tax burden. Okay, so in effect, a prohibition and an infinitely high tax are basically the same thing. It's essentially economically identical. So a taxation is only a form of prohibition, by virtue of the degree of the size of the scale of the tax. Yes. And what you're saying, Norbert, as I understand it, is the tax is now so high, or will become so high in Germany, that it'll be more expensive to be a vapor than to be a smoker. Yes. Okay, that is quite something. Agnieszka, any other things that we can add to the toolkit of the stealth prohibitionist?
Just to build on what Norbert said, I think the same applies to regulation. Mm-hmm. So basically making the smoke-free products less appealing than cigarettes, actually. Banning flavors, reducing nicotine, reducing or banning the way that these products can be communicated, etc., etc. Okay, so a couple more elements of stealth prohibition coming up there. So prohibiting elements of the product proposition that would appeal and make it attractive to switch from smoking to vaping. So you mentioned flavors,
nicotine caps,
reduction,
anything else?
restrictions on the communication with the consumers,
So
restrictions
that's a
at the point
prohibition
of
of an
sale.
information flow.
Yes, removing the product from the point of sale, visibility, etc. So how the consumer is going to learn about these products.
Okay. Federico, anything else to add to the toolkit of the prohibitionist, stealth prohibitionist?
It's quite a long list so far, but I would add, I mean, I was thinking while I was listening to my fellow panelists, the case of Chile, for instance, in which, you know, these products are not forbidden, supposedly. They are pharmaceutical products, and the government never granted a license to any pharmacy to sell them. So they are, and you have those kinds of course, you know, taxes can be a way to you know, basically forbid them or make them very much unavailable. And the other issue is, which has been a very big problem from the beginning, that, you know, speaking about e-cigarettes and considering and putting everything in the same bag as tobacco, as, you know, combustion tobacco, that has created a lot of ripple effects, I would say, that we are still suffering.
Okay, so what are the consequences of stealth prohibition? What happens? What are, you know, if you like, unintended or perverse consequences, missing trade-offs? What happens when you have a stealth prohibition? Lindsey, you give some first initial thoughts. I'm going to be coming to questions in a minute, so think of your question.
The United States, the EVALI, the lung vaping injuries, was kind of, I think, the perfect example of unregulated products and how they can pose a harm to consumers. And unfortunately, what our states decided to do, let's just go ban more. Like, ban, you know, products unregulated, so that you have that market. You just have a black market, and vaping's not going anywhere. You know, you're not going to be able to let that, you know, that door close. So you really want robust regulations to make sure that these products are safe for consumers. So largely, yeah, the unregulated market is a really big problem, and also it's very lucrative for unscrupulous actors to get into that.
Okay. So I want to pick up on something she said there, which is, I think there are two types of regulation. There's regulation that is designed to help consumers, i.e. the product doesn't catch fire, doesn't electrocute you, isn't toxic, is what it says it is on the label, and so on.
No vitamin E.
No, exactly. And then there's regulation that's designed to deter use. And it's that type of regulation that I think starts to form a stealth prohibition. You know, so flavor bans,
The FDA,
nicotine caps.
FDA is denying all the flavored e-liquids
exactly.
right now. Yes, and
a PMTA process that creates a big hurdle.
Yeah.
Okay. Any other things? So one of the consequences there is you end up with unregulated products. You don't end up with the products don't disappear, they just become unregulated. No, but any other consequences from stealth prohibitions?
Well, the main problem is many smokers won't consider switching because it's too expensive. They'll think well, they are taxed so high, they must be bad. It's a psychological feedback.
Okay.
Preventing smokers.
So adverse behavior change or the lack of beneficial behavior change. So people don't switch, or they relapse because it becomes too expensive, or they go from dual use back to singular smoking or whatever.
Yes. Okay. Or they are driven to DIY, do it yourself, and get their supplies from questionable sources. Like they use baking flavors and PG and VG base from some other products like horse shops. And,
horse shops?
Yes.
Okay, horse shops.
PG is used in the is used as a food supplement for horses.
Okay, good. That must be a German thing. Okay. Good.
As in vape shops, these ingredients would be simply ludicrously expensive.
Yeah. Okay. All right. And
Maybe-
Agnieszka, any other consequences, you can say what you want to say, but any other consequences from stealth prohibitions?
Well, actually, it prevents innovation. I mean, purely from the
Innovation.
industry perspective, it does not really encourage transformation of the industry. So you keep the industry producing the most harmful product instead of moving towards something which is better for the consumer, better for the society.
So I think the innovation point is really interesting. I mean, things like the PMTA process in the United States really slows down innovation.
It stunts innovation.
Yeah.
It's stunted. Yeah.
And it was
It
supposed to
stunts it.
promote harm reduction.
Yes, I mean, well, you can talk more about it. Like the IQOS in the United States, it's like the old version of it.
Well, it's a
and
vintage version.
It's
That's what we
vintage.
can
It's a
call it.
relic, you
Exactly.
know. And
You need to
so
come to Europe or to Japan to see.
to get to the new world. It's kind of amazing.
I think there's another interesting innovation thing is with stealth regulation, which is the creative effort on the part of companies goes into working around stealth regulation. So if you take the EU 20 milligrams per milliliter cap, designers have had to create new devices that deliver a good nicotine dose that stay within that cap. So the Juul 2 product is a piece of innovation that's gone in not to necessarily benefiting the consumer, but for getting around regulation that takes their other products off the market. So you get a waste of innovative resources in some respects. Federico, any other effects from stealth prohibition?
It's very funny, you know, you said a couple of times stealth regulation instead of stealth prohibition, which I fully agree why you said it, I think. And I think what we are talking here is the issue of when what kind of regulation we want, how far. Should regulators be more humble, perhaps, and leave more open for more space for innovation? And Agnieszka was talking about innovation. Just a couple of thoughts about how innovation and regulation interact that I think may come handy to this discussion. When a plane flies at 1,239 kilometers per hour, if I'm not mistaken, it produces the sonic boom. It breaks the sound barrier. And if you are witnessing this phenomenon from the surface, what you see is the sound chasing the plane. And this is how innovation and regulation interact. Regulation always comes from behind, always comes later. And this is unfortunately something that regulators sometimes forget. I understand why people who are part of the activist movement, because particularly I come from Latin America where most of all these products are basically forbidden, are treated like plutonium. I understand why they want regulation. I myself, I'm in favor of smart regulation in the sense of safeguarding the population. However, we have to bear in mind two things. Firstly, that it's difficult, and I mean, one of the things that our ranking shows, unfortunately, is that there's a lot of room for improvement. The regulatory situation in the 59 countries we surveyed is far from perfect, from many reasons. And the second one is that this regulation should always be extremely humble, should leave space for innovation. When we see the history of vaping devices, which is, by the way, it's not only an amazing innovation, but it's also an innovation pushed by the consumers, which is very difficult, and let's say creations of consumers that they were trying very weird things at the beginning with the batteries of the old cell phones. It's even funny. But when you see that should be allowed. And we have to be extremely cool because, let's say, I would say, and with this I finish, the 0 degree of this discussion should be these products, there is no ground to have these products in the illegal, being illegal. That should be like the degree 0, because, I mean, if these products are illegal, because, I mean, vapors explode, which is, of course, ludicrous. I mean, cars should be illegal, planes should be illegal, they fall from time to time. So there is no ground. That should be like the first. Then we should talk about regulation. But we are already, let's say, it's been 20 years almost from the e-cigarette. We are already in a very civilized situation. So it shouldn't be, we shouldn't be talking, from panic. We shouldn't be talking from, what are we going to do? No, regulation should be, okay, yes. I just want to make sure that if a liquid has X amount, whatever ingredients, it has those and not something else, and that's it. Very humble, very open to new possibilities, new products that make them up, new companies that make them up.
Okay.
So I think that should be the...
So you're kind of reinforcing my point there, which is that there isn't really a good case for no regulation. You want regulation that is focused on the interests of the consumer in terms of their health, safety, consumer rights, that they get what they pay for and they get what they expect and so on. But it's the regulation that's designed to deter use, raise taxes and so on. And we picked up, I think, 3 major themes there. First of all, you would get an unregulated black market, which could actually be more dangerous than the regulated market. Secondly, you get adverse behavioral changes, so people smoke instead of vape, or they do other risky things. They don't necessarily, because something's prohibited, it doesn't disappear and they stop using it. And then we get an impact on innovation, which means that there's a compromise in future progress. We lose on future progress and future opportunities. Now we're starting now to talk about what good regulation. I'm going to come to you all in a minute, so don't worry. We're just going to go one more run down the line. Good regulation. Now your presentation, Agnieszka, was good on this. Do you want to just explain what you think would be good regulation for, say, the vaping market, and potentially also whether that should evolve over time? We might look at the sort of dynamics of regulation over time.
So I think the good regulation should be based on the evidence and the science. Mm-hmm. I think that should be the first principle. So you look at the risk profile of the product and you regulate according to that. What I was talking in my presentation about, there are some simple rules that could guide the good regulatory framework. And we can summarize them as 4 A's.
4
which
A's.
Is awareness, so making people aware that less harmful products exist, making people aware about the benefits of these products, but also about the risks. Then making these products conveniently accessible so that people can buy them, can find them at least in those shops where they can sell, where they can buy cigarettes. Then making these products appealing enough to encourage switching, what we discussed already, nicotine limits, flavors, and all the features that are relevant for the adult smokers to switch. And last thing that Norbert discussed is affordability. So these products need to be affordable, so the taxation should be favoring these products, mm-hmm. so that the consumer is encouraged to switch. Maybe just one additional element I wanted to make the point. Actually, good regulation, just to build on what was said about having regulation, or having regulation is better than no regulation, is that regulation can actually prevent prohibition. And we see it, especially today, where there is so little confidence in new products, less harmful products, whether this is vape, heated tobacco, or nicotine pouches. And there is so much attempt to ban these products. It's better to regulate them as soon as possible, to also prevent the market from irresponsible commercial practices, which then trigger excessive regulatory interventions going towards the prohibition.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so worth looking at Agnieszka's presentation for that 4A framework, which sets out a reasonable basis for, what were they again? Affordability, access, awareness
and accessibility.
And accessibility, yeah. Okay, so those are reasonable regulatory objectives that work in the interests of consumers, and that's what I think people should be after, is regulation that works for consumers, not against consumers. But Lindsey, I want to go to you now, because there's a very strong push, particularly in the United States, where literally everyone is insane, to...
Have you been there?
I have been there, and it's true. There's another A, which is age, and there's a complete... kind of flip out about youth vaping epidemics, and there's a whole separate worldview that says that the whole of regulation should be focused on deterring underage access. Now, you fight these battles, like a tomcat in every state house in the country, in the federal government, what do you say when these people come at you and say, look, this is all about youth. What's your story on regulation and youth?
Well, I have an awesome team. Martin's here right now, so I'm very fortunate for my consumers.
You can't hand it over to someone else.
I'm not going to hand it over to him. I had to do most of the youth numbers. You're seeing in the States right now, you've had a decrease from the 2019 numbers, and they're all burying it, and it's really unfortunate. The new Center for Tobacco Products Director, he actually, from 2015 to 2017, you actually saw a youth decrease, and the CDC applauded it. This is great to go. And then now with these numbers going down, they're burying it, or they're going up with oh, well, all of these current users, 9% of the current users are daily users, and it's just, I'd have way more colorful language than what I can say on this stage about that one. And it's really unfortunate because there has been really good things on youth. The youth use has decreased, and that should be applauded. And looking at why was that? Was it T21 that did it, for example, when the national government did Tobacco 21, which we were having in the States, prior to that? Was it Eval-I? I know that Eval-I turned a lot of consumers that were vapors that went back to smoking because they thought it was safer. So I just go back with the numbers. I mean, the numbers are going down. Thank God for that. They continue to go down. There is no the idea that vaping led to combustible cigarette use is just out the window. They don't even use that one argument anymore because the data doesn't prove it. So
some still use.
Yeah, well, you just got to keep hammering at them. And I mean, Colorado is a perfect example, telling these lawmakers too to wait. You were going to have your 2021 survey come out. They just came out 2 days ago. Wait until you see what the numbers actually are. You're relying on 2017, 2019 numbers for something you're doing in 2022. So you just got to come back with them with the numbers, but you got to be sexy about it, and you also have to be brief about it.
I think there's a very strong argument that you cannot, or is never made in the United States, which is among the frequent teenage vapors, the teenagers who are vaping frequently, those are the ones who would otherwise be smoking.
Yes.
They actually rule out counting that.
We can't, well, is that an argument that we can use? I mean, that's where I've always, especially if you look at in 1995 in the United States, 70% of high school students had tried a combustible cigarette. For 2019, it's less than 25%. I mean, awesome declines, but do we bring up the switching part? I don't know.
Okay, and Agnieszka, you're from a big tobacco company, Philip Morris International. One view of a company like that is that its business model is to be a gigantic sort of evil predator, persuade young people to take up nicotine, hook them, get them addicted, get them into vaping or whatever else, and then move them on to cigarettes and have them as customers for life. What do you say to that, and how would you avoid that happening if it does happen?
Well, I think there are enough adult smokers in the world to switch them to less harmful products. So I think we are fine with that for many, many years ahead of us. And if the regulation does not actually help, these smokers will stay. Yeah. And the numbers are not reducing. I think just to build on what Lindsey just said, a lot is based on the assumption, not on the evidence and data. And that's the issue, at least what we see also in the European Union. I mean, the youth usage of vaping or any other products is one of the key themes today that is driving the regulatory debate. I think in the past it was the science that was heavily challenged. I think these days it's no longer the case because they understood that there is science, there are facts, and it's difficult to challenge that. So now it moved to more emotional aspects, which are not supported by the facts and figures. And I recall, I think it was 2-3 months ago, the discussion in one of the EU countries about generation sales ban. And actually then the Minister of Health during the press conference said, nicotine pouches, these products are very bad because youth is using them, and we assume that youth will start smoking when they use them. There is no data to support that, actually. And if you look at the data from the vaping products, it does not give you this data anymore. I mean, there's no gateway effect, even with vaping. I mean, very prevalent product. So, but everything is based on the assumption. I think this is one of the key challenges we have today, how to crack it. We need very robust post-market monitoring just to get this data, why youth is using products, how to address it. Is it an issue of the product itself, or maybe just lack of enforcement? I think these are all the questions that boil down to evidence-based discussion.
Or maybe the kids use nicotine because it helps them in some way, and it helps them calm down, and it moderates their stress and anxiety and helps get them through their teenage years.
Someone
Is that
needs
possible?
to investigate.
Yeah, someone should investigate. All right, I'm surprised PMI doesn't already know, given it's been in the business for 60 years or whatever. All right, one last set of questions, and then we'll go out to the audience. So we hear that the government of Ireland and a legislative body in Ireland is thinking of banning flavors, all flavors, including menthol, in e-cigarettes, okay? Team, your task is to come up with the one-page briefing on why they should or shouldn't do that, and I assume you think they shouldn't. What are the points you draw, and what are the bullet points that you make to the government of Ireland? And I will literally write this down and send it to them. So what are the arguments against banning flavors, and why shouldn't they ban flavors if they think it will reduce youth vaping? Who's going to go first?
You want to start? You can start. You haven't talked about it.
Well, there's a very nice study by Professor Friedman from the US that definitely shows that it doesn't matter if there are flavors or not for the youth to experiment with it or uptake vaping and then continue to the evil smoking. But there is a very definite drop in people who quit smoking by switching to vaping and staying quit when there are no flavors except for so-called tobacco flavors.
So there's two elements to that argument. One, drawing on Abby Friedman's case study on San Francisco, in which flavors were banned, or was it all of e-cigarettes were banned? And all flavors were banned. All flavors were banned, and then boom, smoking went up. So an adverse behavioral response. And then the other one, the second part of your answer was fewer adults will switch because of the appealing, one of the 4 A's, the products have become less appealing. Are there any other arguments on vaping and
UK?
flavors? Sorry?
UK, just point them out to UK. There is no issue.
Okay.
And the flavors are available.
Okay, so that's so that's, if flavors played an important causal role, there would be a lot more vaping, a lot more teenage vaping everywhere there is flavors. That's your argument there, isn't it? And in places like the UK, where there's a lot of vaping, there isn't a lot of teenage vaping, but there are a lot of flavors. So it can't be that strongly causal. Must be something else going on. Lindsey.
In Massachusetts, state in the United States, they did ban all flavored tobacco products. In 2020, it went into effect, and what you've seen is, the unregulated market coming up, and so they've lost cigarette tax revenue, but they had to increase funding for their illegal tobacco task force by like 73%. So
Okay.
increased cost of the states on trying to deal with black market products.
Okay, so we've had a demand side response. People start smoking. We've had a supply side response in which a black market forms, and the people who want flavors get them, but not via the stealth prohibition, but via cross-border trade or by
And
making
no
their own.
And no taxes.
And no taxes are paid, so they avoid taxes as well. Any other arguments on the flavors front? Hang on a sec. We'll come to the audience for arguments on flavors in a minute. Any more?
Just very quickly. Well, of course, I mean, removing the flavors will, if you ask to anyone who currently vapes, I mean, for a big percentage of them, the flavors is an issue, definitely, that has helped them make the switch, and you'll be putting their lives in danger. And just, if you ask me why they are doing, I would say they are doing this, and this, I think, goes beyond the vaping or, harm reduction issue. There's unfortunately a very sad and dangerous tendency in our societies today, which is something like postmodern Puritanism, which has to do with taking the pleasure out of everything, and you have a war against many things, and I think this is in part related to that as well.
All right. So that's another one. There's a straightforward libertarian argument. People use libertarian as if it's a pejorative term, but that's like, no, we should have flavors because we want them, and we don't allow adult society to be bent out of shape by things that young people do. If I could add one, I think it's just facile to believe that these behaviors are determined by flavors, which is, I think, what we...
There is no data to support that. The flavors are why kids vape. We have a ton of data that shows that nicotine use is driven by psychosocial factors, much deeper in the personality and the circumstances of people than something that's going on in the device in front of them. So I think that's, if you base your policy on the wrong cause and you assume it's something that it isn't, then you're going to get unintended consequences because you haven't dealt with the underlying cause. Now, does anyone in the audience want to add to this package of arguments on flavors? Let's go quickly there and then come down to the front. We'll keep these short if you don't mind.
Thank you. Sam Hampshire from Botec. 2 points, if I may. Firstly, demand-side adaptations. Self-flavoring. Unrestricted additives might open the door for non-age-gated sales, and specifically the use of flavor profiles that might appeal more, either in description or in practice, to youth. So that might be a case for protecting some, more normal, quote-unquote, flavors. The other thing I wanted to say is to reiterate a point made by Abby Friedman from Yale, which is that even if we do take a narrow approach to caring for youth specifically, we know that one of the drivers of youth smoking is having adults around them who smoke. Yeah. So if we don't give those adults a chance to stop smoking, in the end, we're going to harm the youth as well. So a really important argument, the adult role model effect, and allowing adults to switch to vaping will have a strong effect on youth smoking. That's another good argument. Okay, down here for any more? A couple more down here. Go on. Just make sure I can see anyone. There we go, one there, and then one behind.
I just have a provocative one for you, Clive. The flavors in tobacco were argued by the tobacco control community, including, I think, yourself, that they were used to attract kids into smoking. And despite the fact that a significant amount of cigarettes around the world have never had flavors on them, and there was no correlation between those things. And aren't we, although a lot of people would argue the ends justify the means, aren't we now reaping the benefits in nicotine, in safer forms of nicotine, by them using the same arguments that were used to suggest that tobacco was flavoured to attract kids into nicotine's flavoured to attract kids into vaping?
Well, all right, I'm not sure what that argument is, but it's clear that cigarettes are flavoured with something. They're flavoured with products of combustion of tobacco. And one of the interesting arguments is if you go back to the 80s and 90s, you'd find very high levels of youth smoking, which shows that kids, if they want to, are perfectly capable of using tobacco flavour, and I mean by this actual burning tobacco flavour, and there isn't a reason why they need any other flavour in order to smoke or vape or use any sort of product. So yes, I think the point is that the underlying driver of these behaviours are psychosocial, not necessarily characteristics of the product, as long as the products themselves are acceptable. That's what I think. So I think, the idea that cigarettes are unflavoured is just nonsense. It's just they're flavoured with something that isn't an additive. Otherwise, no one would use them.
Can I add to that?
Yeah, go.
So I've worked with a lot of the vapors, and there is this really unique property on them being, blueberry flavored or something that really helps the people who smoke quit smoking and stay away from cigarettes. And so the idea, at least in the United States, is really fearful that we're only going to have tobacco flavored, and that would get people to go back to cigarettes because the flavors are so good. So when they go and smoke, the cigarette doesn't taste good anymore. So it's
So that's another good argument, which is when people are trying to get away from tobacco, why do you limit their choice to being only tobacco?
NRT gum comes in cherry. It's not just tobacco flavored nicotine replacement, gum. No, it's all flavored. So there is, that unique property of the flavors.
I think there was another one just behind, or is that right? I can't see you.
Hi, it's John Fell.
Oh, hi, John. Sorry, I can't see you.
I've got a slightly different perspective. I used to smoke socially, and I enjoyed the taste of cigarette smoke because it's quite complex. And there's this misperception, I think, that tobacco-flavoured vapes taste like cigarettes. They don't.
No.
If they did, I'd love that flavour. But the fact is, it's a rubbish approximation of tobacco flavour. Normally, it's a flavour itself, which to me tastes more like toffee than cigarette smoke. And if I'm only presented with that taste in the things I can vape, I get bored.
Okay, so that's a point about the diversity of the experience, that you would want to try a lot of different flavors to retain interest.
Because all the vaping flavors I try are quite sweet, and I find all of them get kind of cloying and sickly after a while. So being able to switch between flavors is important because none of the vaping flavors yet, and certainly not tobacco, get close to the satisfying complexity of what you get out of the tobacco taste in a cigarette.
So an interesting and sort of partly insane aspect of this debate is the arbitrary choice of tobacco flavor, which is, as you say, a flavor. It is not the same flavor as cigarettes, and it is not the flavor of unflavored vaping products.
Exactly.
It's somehow become a baseline of acceptability against which everything else is judged. And one of the things I've argued, well, you could choose any flavor and show that other flavors were more popular. You could choose, I don't know, cheesecake flavor and go, look, everyone else prefers flavors other than cheesecake flavor, therefore we should only allow cheesecake flavor. Any other thoughts on flavor bans? Okay, we've got a couple more. There's one at the back and then Marina down there. I think it's Brad Rodu, I can't. Behind you. There you go.
Hi, for a flavor ban or any other ban in a single state, I was wondering, and maybe Lindsey can answer this, I was wondering about surrounding states and fully exploiting the effects that it has on surrounding states.
Why are you asking that question? You already know the answer to it. I know in Massachusetts, so New Hampshire actually saw an increase in cigarette sales, yet they didn't see an increase in smokers. They actually had a decrease in smokers. So you are seeing all the states that they're going to, when you do it on a statewide level, they go to the surrounding states. And it's really unfortunate if you think when you look at tobacco control in the states too. It's so Massachusetts bans this. They're losing the cigarette tax revenue. They're also losing master settlement agreement money, and yet they have still the same amount of smokers, but less money to go towards tobacco control and programs that might either help them quit or prevent youth smoking.
All right, Marina. Right down in the front. We're doing this to be like really difficult. We're going from front to back.
Hi, Marina Foltia. I just wanted to add some legal flavor to the flavor discussion. What I have to add is that with respect to flavor bans, but bans more generally, we can have a good argument. Since, Clive, you're wanting to make a list, then one point on the list could be that to the extent that there are cigarettes which are still flavored in the world, I know many countries, they have prohibited that, but there are still countries that have it. And to the extent these countries exist, the flavored cigarettes exist, and you do not allow flavored electronic cigarettes, this actually, and them being in a competitive market, or them being actually like products in for example, in World Trade Organization terms, which is an organization with very precise rules that everyone has to apply, including USA, you can actually say that there is a discrimination of these products, of the e-cigarette products, because they have a less advantageous status on the market comparing to cigarettes. And this applies to favors, and it applies also to total bans. So why a less risky product should be completely banned while, for example, cigarettes are in the market? So it's a clear discrimination. So this argument can help electronic cigarettes, that at least they should be traded freely. And for flavors, the extent cigarettes exist with flavors, flavors could also be allowed.
Okay, so this is a really good point. This is about stealth regulation in general. Stealth prohibition in general. So a government does things that partially prohibits, say, vaping products, but it doesn't do the same to cigarettes, okay? What Marina is saying is that that is potentially illegal in trade law, as would be. But Maria, who can bring that sort of case? Could you or I bring it, or who? Where is the access to that kind of pathway for challenging that kind of discrimination?
So for the WTO itself, it's a government-to-government system, meaning that a producer of electronic cigarette will have to convince its own government to bring the matter to the WTO, and it doesn't have to necessarily go into litigation immediately. There are mechanisms which just, they start with discussing it or bringing it to the committees first, and then litigation is later on in the process if there is no agreement in the committees. And then there is another system which is called investor-state dispute settlement, where investors in a specific countries, let's say a e-cig producer, big producer, had invested, and then the regulation comes saying, well, you can't use flavors. Then that investor could eventually have the right to sue the state under certain, if the agreement exists between the two countries.
Okay. So there's law there, but it's quite difficult to access.
I'm sorry?
Yeah, okay. Right, I'm going to open up now for more general, has everyone got more to say on flavors? Is that, so hands up if it's flavors. Oh my God, there's a lot. Okay, let's get the mic down the back, please. I can't see who it is, that guy there. Yeah. Let's round this up, because I want to get to more general questions.
Thank you so much. I'm Stephen from Malawi. I think I was happy to hear from Marina on what she was talking about.
Speak up a bit.
Okay. I'm Stephen from Malawi. I was just amused when Marina was speaking about WTO with regards to the bans of cigarettes. I think maybe also countries, maybe such as developing countries, maybe it has to do with HS codes, whereby how does the customs authorities or tax authorities define the e-vaping when it comes with different flavors, because maybe it might be totally new product. Maybe that's why countries are a little bit finding it difficult. That's why, since what we've noted is like sometimes in WTO, a same product can change in form depending on development. Then it becomes difficult for government on how to classify it.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. Next, there, and then down here.
Yeah, I'll keep it quick, but you could also make a slippery slope argument or inconsistent policy approach just looking at flavors and alcohol, and why are flavors and alcohol permitted, but then we have restrictions on these products.
Do you want to come?
We have
Lindsey
flavors
wants
and
to comment on
alcohol
that.
because the state regulation of alcohol, not the FDA. So that's, yeah, they're not going to ban anything on alcohol. They tried that once. Didn't work out so well.
Okay. Martin, down here, please.
Yeah, kind of an observation. In 2020, I had a conversation with a guy called Florian Scheibine, who works with homeless populations, and he had a donation from an e-cigarette company of a whole load of products which he could then offer to homeless smokers to see if they could quit by using vaping instead. He said he had two flavors, tobacco flavor and mixed berries flavor. And he said the mixed berries flavor shot out the door as soon as he had them. And when he only had tobacco flavor left, so I've only got these, he said many of these homeless smokers just said, no, I'm not interested, and just didn't bother. So we have real life experiments like this that we could probably present to regulators and say, you know, this is the importance of flavors.
One of the peculiar things about this is somehow tobacco flavor is all right and all the other flavors are not all right. Now, is that because the people behind this are, I'm going to ask you in a way, Martin, like totally clueless and they think that that's what a vaping product just tastes like if you don't flavor it? Or have they chosen that flavor because they know it's unpopular and therefore it's a form of additional stealth prohibition? You know, I always use the example of, well, why not standardize on rancid meat flavor, since nobody's going to like that? No youth are going to take that flavor up. Why have they alighted on tobacco flavor as the one flavor that's acceptable, and all the PMTAs are for tobacco flavor? What's so great or bad about tobacco flavor? Any thoughts from the audience on that, please?
As a cynic, I'd say, yeah, they're doing it because they just don't like the product and they know that tobacco flavour is an off-putting flavour. But on the flip side of that, they should also realise that if you want someone to carry on smoking, the best thing you can do is only offer them tobacco flavour vapes because they're more likely to relapse.
John, did you want to say something? You don't have to. I just thought you were signalling him.
Hi, it's John from the UK. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. What Martin said about the homeless smokers, I've had similar experience working with entrenched smokers with Bristol Stop Smoking Service. The fruit flavours, the dessert flavours fly out the door. The tobacco flavours are the ones you're left with. Is it stupidity or is it malice? I think it's a little bit of both.
Bit of both, yeah. Okay.
But yeah, it's a difficult one. But tobacco only ain't going to work.
All right. Is this a flavours point? Okay, say it.
Well, it's a flavours point and it's also an Ireland point.
Here we go.
Sweeney, NNA Ireland. The biggest thing they're missing when it comes to this new legislation is that Ireland currently does not have an age restriction. So the first point would be to put an age restriction in place and actually enforce it. So, anybody can go on in Ireland at the minute. But the other thing is that frequent use of vaping products in Ireland is exclusively smokers. Less than 1% are never smokers, so that's the people that's using these products. And we also know that vaping has contributed 38% of overall quit rates over the last 5 or 6 years. So what you have to look at then is, if you take away the flavours from these people, as you mentioned, perverse consequences, what's going to happen? And we looked at this in the ETHRA survey 2 years ago, when we asked people how would you respond to a flavour ban. 28% said that they could go back to smoking. 71% said that they would look for alternative sources, be that black market, grey market, or whatever. So, I mean, we know the consequences because we've seen the data. It's more smoking. And
so that's the adverse behavioural consequences point. Just before we go on, Damien there raised the interesting question of age restrictions, and you mentioned it, T21. What do people think about setting age thresholds at 21 for smoking and for vaping? Where do people stand on that? Any views on that particular measure?
I'm against it, no.
Okay, explain.
Well, in the United States, you can be tried as an adult, be convicted for life in prison. You can be conscripted into war service. You can go into massive amount of student loan debt, but you can't smoke a cigarette. I do not appreciate that at all.
So you're against it for both smoking and vaping?
Oh, and yep.
Now, Agnieszka, where does PMI come out on TVE21 or whatever?
Look, I would agree with Lindsey. So the same age restriction should apply to everything. And I think it's trying to redefine the adulthood, which I think as a principle is probably wrong.
Norbert? What's the situation in Germany first?
In Germany, it's very strictly 18.
For both?
For both. But I could imagine it's something. If the regulators got a clue about THR, they might implement something similar to the alcohol laws, where you could buy beer and wine at 16 and the stronger stuff at 18.
Okay. Federico, in your index, how do you treat age restrictions? Is it good if they're higher or good if they're lower? Or is it indifferent?
What we would penalize if there were no age restriction at all.
Okay.
Let's say that you can smoke. But we didn't care about smoking. But you could vape at 7 years old. Well, that would mean you would be a very cool kid probably, but you shouldn't do that. No, but really, but let's say we didn't enter the discussion between it's the customs of the country. Mm-hmm. If in some countries it's 21.
So it really just linked to age of majority. Exactly. And no trying to game the system. Okay. All right. General questions to the panel of any nature. And I want to finish with a discussion about regulator, one of the forms of stealth regulation prohibition we haven't discussed, which is very low nicotine cigarette rules now coming in New Zealand, talked about forever in the United States. What do we think of that? Okay, so any points on that or on any other issue to the panel? Yeah, second. Okay, so a couple down here. We'll go over there and then we'll come down here. Go.
Thanks. H from Factasia. Two stealth prohibition issues that I think are worth considering. Hong Kong, Thailand. Hong Kong and Thailand share the same strategy, or shared the same strategy of disallowing the customs and excise to give a tax bracket for the importation of any alternative nicotine product, which allowed them to put their ducks in a row to, in Hong Kong, ban it, and Thailand, we'll see where we go with that. The other thing in Hong Kong was the youth smoking. Years and years ago, we stood up in front of LegCo, as did many, many others, and saying, you have the power to ban the sale of these products to underage purchases. They didn't. They didn't. They didn't. For years, they didn't. Then they used the youth vaping epidemic, which doesn't exist, to justify a complete ban on all sales of e-cigarettes.
So the one argument here is that these age restrictions kind of are slightly protective against worse forms of stealth prohibition.
Well, yes, and I think by failing to enact that kind of legislation, which nobody would stand in the way of, they allowed the situation to exacerbate, and it could be said that there was a possibility that Koch was manipulating that, as they definitely manipulated the failure to allow the tax brackets to be applied to these products. It was a deliberate delaying tactic.
Someone in front of you, I think, wanted to speak. Are they still there? Okay, quick points, please. We're going to go right around the audience. Come on.
I just wanted to comment a little bit, as tax is in the title, and some say tobacco policy is finance policy, if there wouldn't be the possibility with a reasonable tax policy that we move, when we consider the cross-elasticity between products, that we move consumption from cigarettes to less harmful products. If the auditorium can comment on this.
So this is an important economic argument that these products function as economic substitutes. You change the price of one, you change the demand for the other. Norbert, did you want to say something about that?
Yes. In the original German tax proposal, it was a nicotine tax. And the only real problem everybody except the government had with this proposal was the amount. All their calculations were based on an assumption they pulled out of the air, that 1 milligram nicotine is the equivalent to one cigarette. And they calculated their tax levels on this, which would have, resulted in a tax that is equivalent to the gold price, 48.6 euros per gram. And that would have made especially the now more common pod systems very expensive, since they use high nicotine concentrations. But it would have favored the consumers who reduce their nicotine concentration. if they had a more reasonable, sensible approach to the level of taxation, so that it wouldn't be more expensive than smoking, then, well, it would have been acceptable. But now, but in the last 2 days, before the decision was made, they changed it to a volume tax, which now favors the port systems with high concentrations, but the more common and more long-term used, lower concentration liquids get prohibitively expensive.
Okay, so I think there's a real lesson in this, which is these little back-of-the-envelope calculations done by government officials, where they say, you know, this much nicotine is the equivalent of a cigarette, or this much volume is the typical daily use of it. We've got to really get across these, because, you know, they're making stuff up, and they can have enormous consequences, I think. And I think the 20 milligrams per milliliter limit in the EU falls into this category. The recitals to the directive say they wanted to make it equivalent to cigarettes, but when they did their silly calculation, they ended up with a number that was completely unequivalent to cigarettes. So again, the little things that they're using to define this regulation can be enormously dangerous. Oh, careful.
Ana Saraiva from Brazil, which is of course a developing country. And the first thing which came to my mind when we talk about accessibility is the nicotine pouches, right? And being a trained pharmacist, this is exactly what I would go or would argue. But different from the previous example guiding the Irish government to the UK about the vaping and the flavored stuff, we cannot do it this pointing them to the EU, because a couple of days ago, the Belgian government has notified the European Commission their intention to ban nicotine pouches. So I'm just wondering if the panel could comment on which arguments could you use to address such a thing. Thank you.
Okay, so Belgium has come out of the blocks and has decided that the right thing to do is to ban nicotine pouches. We can go into why that happened, but why shouldn't it happen? Has anyone, Norbert, you want to?
Nicotine pouch guy.
You got the mic?
Well, nicotine pouches are harm reduction, even more than snus, and they got potentially the same flavor profile as vaping. So they are a viable substitute for smoking, or on the step to as an alternative to vaping, for example. And the risk profile is even better than vaping, since there's no inhalation involved, and the ingredients are similar to, or even better than many
all right, but let me try the argument on you that they all have made in Belgium. Okay, the first argument is the companies who sell these products just went mad to try to get market share, and in particular, they went after a youth market. So these products function as entry products into nicotine addiction.
Well, first, I would like any serious study to see any serious study that shows us the addiction level of nicotine, pure nicotine as in vaping or in nicotine pouches. There is none. There is no serious study that confirms this claim. And
so basically, the argument in Belgium is that it's an overreaction to bad corporate practice, and the answer would be to have regulation.
Proper regulation.
On good corporate practice. Okay,
maybe just one more comment. I mean, it's paradoxical because Belgium is banning nicotine pouches, but cigarettes will be still allowed and available. So I mean.
So you've got a massive asymmetry in the regulation. Right. Any more questions? Any more points from the audience? Okay, so there's one there, Maria, and there. Sorry, I don't know your name. Nice short points, please, because we're coming to the end.
Marewa Glover from New Zealand. Thank you for mentioning New Zealand's upcoming or threatened next legislative change, which intends to introduce a cap on nicotine in combustible tobacco at 0.05 milligrams per gram. Mm-hmm. So only the very low nicotine cigarettes will be available. And that will also apply to the heated tobacco product because it is classified as a tobacco product in New Zealand. Along with that, they're proposing a sinking lid on the age of access. So at the moment we're at R18, and that will go up by 1 year every year endlessly. And the third one is age VL and C.
Access.
The sinking lid, sinking lid on the number of tobacco retailers we have about 8,000 throughout the country at the moment to 300 to 500, and New Zealand is the size of Japan, and we have 5 million people spread across that area.
Great.
Is that stealth? Is that prohibition by stealth, please?
The VLNC thing is more than by stealth, but let's get some reactions on that. First of all, reducing the nicotine in cigarettes down to a very low level, okay? The argument for it, there are two types of argument for it. People won't get addicted to these cigarettes, and therefore the habit will die out. Adults will smoke them less because they're not as pleasurable, and therefore they won't get the same exposure. I think it's actually a ludicrous argument. But the more plausible argument is that will function as a de facto prohibition. No one will buy these products, but everyone will then switch to vaping. And that's a good thing, isn't it? Isn't it?
No, I mean, it's anti-science. Why are we attacking the nicotine? Nicotine is the least, I mean, it's addictive, but it's the least harmful thing in a cigarette. It's all the other chemicals that are killing people. So this demonization of nicotine, and it's been a few years that, and it's kind of amazing. So I think with the low nicotine cigarettes, once again, we're not getting to this is why a cigarette is harmful. Now we're just making it more confusing to the public, and we need to fear nicotine, not actually tar and combustion.
Okay, so that's an argument that is extremely confusing in the messaging about nicotine. Agnieszka, any other arguments on VLNC?
I agree about creating the confusion, but I would maybe defend a bit the approach, at least specifically for New Zealand, because I think if put in the context, if really the objective is to encourage quitting or switching, and if there is a significant support and robust marketplace for smoke-free products, maybe that can work. But
okay, so
we will see.
So that's a counter argument that actually you can get rid of cigarettes providing you get rid of them by taking the nicotine out, providing there are alternatives to go to. But that's kind of quitting by coercion. Is that an acceptable thing to do in public health? Anyone?
Not in my opinion.
No. Okay. All right. Let's pick on another of the. Sorry, is there a point there? Oh, yes, you were waiting to get. I'm so sorry. Go on.
Yeah. To make a point, we're talking about regulations. I feel like there's no talk between users and the government. And let's say, I think using the regulations that needs to be 10 milligrams nicotine sold. I think this is ridiculous. Why is that? Why there are not any talks about it between users and the government? And if there is, how does it look?
Okay, so this is another case of regulation that's being done against the interests of consumers instead of in favor of the interests of consumers. It's about trying to prevent people use the products rather than making the products safer to use. I think that's at the heart of that point. And the fact that the views of consumers don't weigh very heavily in the judgments made by regulators when they're engaged in stealth prohibition. Could I quickly, is there any views on this business about raising the age 1 year every year, the smoke-free generation proposal, which is coming in New Zealand and was recommended actually to come in England for all tobacco products? John, let's quick remark and then we're going to close.
Yeah, and this kind of wraps in with the whole age prohibition thing anyway. Okay, getting people to avoid smoking, yeah, okay. Have a sales limit. But what's the point in raising it? You don't enforce the one you've got.
Yeah, it's pointless without enforcement. You look at that in the US, you look at it in the EU, you look at it in the UK, and you'll see kids smoking. Yeah.
They're actually stricter on the non-combustible products, on vaping, on pouches, than they are on cigarettes. Which is crazy, because you're actually doing harm. You're encouraging kids to, if they're going to smoke, to keep on smoking.
Yeah, and the kids don't necessarily buy them from retailers anyway. They just get them via social sources. I'm going to close now. I want to get a final thought from each member of our panel on what good regulation looks like. What should we be aiming for? What is the right thing to do? Very quick.
Allowing companies to modify their products without $1 billion.
Okay.
Implementing sensible taxes that really appreciate the relative risk of the product.
I think regulations should aim at positive change, not the punishment, which is today the case.
Okay.
Thank you. I would say that our approach to regulation should be, let's say, the one of permissionless innovation, which is basically the opposite of the precautionary principle. Unless you can build a very strong case against something, by default it should be allowed. And the second thing should be that regulation should never be used, and unfortunately it is for many reasons, to suppress the voices of the ones who want to change the status quo.
All right, great. Regulation in the interests of consumers, risk proportionate, and pro-innovation. Those were the messages I heard. I think that's a good way to end. All right, with that, thank you. I want to thank everyone in the audience for the questions, which were great. Good discussion. And I think it's lunchtime, so end of session. Thanks.